In a previous video I was showing you my method for servicing this ETA 2824 movement, and this is an Ikepod hemipode watch with one of these bolt-on Dubois-Duprez chronograph modules, and I will be following this video up with a look at that module in due course. But what I realized is I never showed you how to replace the bearing or the rotor bearing on the ETA 2824, and so I thought I'd just put together this quick video to show you how to do that. So here we have another ETA 2824 movement. This time it's a Breitling, and if I wobble the rotor with a piece of pegwood, you can see there's quite a bit of play. And so if you look at the inside of the watch back, you'll see this dark ring around there, and of course that's where the rotor has been scraping along the back because of that play. So to remedy that, we're going to change the rotor bearing. First I'm going to remove the rotor from the movement. So here's a look at the rotor off the movement, and here is the bearing. It's this inner circle here, and these are ball bearings mounted, and there's a pinion on the back here. That's all part of the bearing. Now this bearing is friction fit, so here's a new one, fresh in the packet. Now, as I said before, these bearings are friction fit, and I've made myself a handy little tool. Now I've gotten myself an old stake or a replacement stake for one of these Bergen staking sets. As you can see, here's an original one, and what I did was I mounted it in my lathe and I just cut a recess into it. I don't know if you can see that, if I get it in focus, and you see that I've left a little a pin or a post protruding from the center. And so this will aid me to knock out the bearing. And so I put the stake that I've made into the staking tool. And to knock out the bearing, I'm going to use this style of punch, which is a flat head, but it's got a hole. And I'm placing the rotor onto the stake that I've made. Face up. Notice I'm wearing finger cots because I want to use my fingers to hold the rotor, and I don't want to stain the nice plating on there with my fingerprints. And now I'm just lining up the old bearing with my punch, and I'm going to use a hammer just to tap out the bearing. Not a lot of force is needed. So the bearing is out now, and you can see why there was a little post in the center, and it's a very handy little tool and quite easy to make. It took me about 5 minutes. So now I'm ready to mount the new bearing into the rotor. And so I'm swapping the stake over to a flat stake. In actual fact, I really want to use a brass one, so let's get a brass one in there, and the brass one will not scratch the rotor, you see. And so this time I'm going to mount the rotor upside down on top of the stake. Again, using my fingers, so making sure that I'm wearing finger cots so as not to stain the rotor. I'm going to position the bearing into place and gently press down. And this time I'm going to use a flat punch with no hole in it. And the reason for this is because in the past I've used with the hole in it, and it's caused damage to the bearing. So there's a little tip for you. Make sure you use one with no hole in the punch. And so on again with the rotor, And if we can just line up the punch approximately center to the bearing, or as close to center as you can get it, you can start tapping away. And tap gently, you don't want to squash the bearing. It's made of quite thin metal really. And I'm just making sure that it's seated fully home all the way around and that there's no gaps. So with the bearing replaced, I can now mount it back onto the movement. And there is significantly less wobble. So there you go, a brief look on how to replace the automatic rotor bearing, or Ballrace as they're sometimes called, on an ETA 2824 movement. So as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.